All right, get ready to dive into the world of, well, Telugu. Articles, excerpts, linguistic deep dives, you name it, we've got it. You're clearly serious about getting a handle on this language.
Oh, absolutely. And what's fascinating is it's more than just a language, Telugu. It's a cultural time capsule, really. A window into centuries of history in India and beyond.
A linguistic time capsule. I love
Yeah.
that. So before we get too deep, what's the Telugu in a nutshell version for someone just tuning in?
Well, it's one of the Dravidian languages, that family of languages spoken mainly in South Asia. And I don't just mean one of, it's actually the most widely spoken, over 80 million speakers.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It is, primarily in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana in India, where it's got official status. But here's the kicker. Telugu is also one of the 6 classical languages of India.
You know, I've always been curious about that term, classical language. What exactly does it take to reach that level of, I don't know, linguistic prestige?
That's a great question. You see, it's not just about age. It's more about having a really well-established literary tradition, a sense of linguistic independence, you could say.
So like a language that's kind of stood on its own, developed in its own way.
Exactly. It's got ancient roots, of course,
Yeah.
and a body of literature that's considered really valuable. Think Sanskrit, Tamil, Greek, Latin languages that haven't just survived, they've shaped cultures.
That makes sense. Okay, so Telugu's got this long, rich history, but I've always wondered, how do languages even get their names? There's got to be a story there. What about Telugu?
Oh, there's always a story. With Telugu, it goes back to its geography. The name actually seemed to come from a Proto-Dravidian word, ten, which means south.
South. So is it like a direction thing?
Exactly. Linguists think people speaking Sanskrit or Prakrit, they were using Telugu to refer to basically the people who live to their south.
So like those Telugu folks down south kind of thing.
Pretty much. It's all about perspective, right?
Absolutely. Now, I noticed something in the research you sent, something about Trilinga Kshitras. Does that tie in with the name at all?
It does, in a way, though maybe more like a legend than, hard linguistics.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So Trilinga Kitras refers to the 3 ancient temples. Trilinga itself means 3 lingas, those symbolic representations of the Hindu deity Shiva. And there's this idea that maybe Telugu came from Trilinga.
Because of the temples.
Yeah, but most linguists, they see it as more of a folk tale than actual etymology.
A linguistic legend. I love it. It shows how language and culture, they're inseparable,
Completely. And speaking of inseparable, we've got to talk about how Telugu itself has changed over time.
Right, because a language that old, it's got to have gone through some serious transformations.
Oh, tons. Think of it like this prehistoric Telugu, Old Telugu, Middle Telugu, Modern Telugu. Each stage is like a chapter in its story. Historical events, cultural shifts, even contact with other languages, it all leaves a mark.
Each era adding its own flavor to the mix.
Exactly.
Do we have any, hard evidence of these early stages, or is it more of a guessing game based on what we know now?
You'd be surprised. There's an inscription on the Amaravati Stupa that dates back to 200 BCE. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Actual written Telugu words from over 2,000 years ago.
Wow, 200 BCE? It's like finding a message in a bottle, but for language. So we've got these glimpses, but when did Telugu really hit its stride as a literary language?
Well, there are a few key moments, but the Vijayanagara Empire around the 16th century was a golden age for Telugu literature. Explosion of creativity, really.
The 1500s, what was going on then that sparked that?
Well, the Vijayanagara rulers, they were huge patrons of the arts. Telugu literature just blossomed under their support. That's when you get some of the greatest Telugu poets and writers creating works that are still celebrated. There's even a story of a Venetian explorer visited the empire back then, and he was blown away by how many Telugu words ended in vowels, just like his own language, Italian, called Telugu the Italian of the East.
Italian of the East. I like that. Makes you wonder if there's some deeper connection, right? Or just a happy accident of linguistics. But we've talked a lot about Telugu itself. What about influences from other languages?
Oh, it's all connected. Telugu is like a tapestry woven from all these different threads. Sanskrit had a huge influence, especially with those big epic poems being translated. And then you've got Persian and Arabic coming in with various rulers and dynasties, leaving their own linguistic mark.
It's amazing how even language reflects history. Like who was in power, what ideas were flowing around.
For sure. And Telugu, it's adaptable. It takes these influences and makes them its own.
Do we have any examples of these linguistic imports, words that Telugu borrowed?
Oh, tons. The word kaburu in Telugu, it means news or information. It actually comes straight from the Urdu word kabar, which means the same thing.
Wow, that's a direct link.
Right. It's like these words are little time capsules themselves.
So Telugu is this blend of cultures, this adaptable language, and it's spoken by millions, you said. But what about outside of India? Does it have a global presence?
It does. In fact, Telugu is the fastest growing Indian language in the U.S. right now. And there are large Telugu-speaking communities all over South Africa, the UK. It's really gone global.
That's wild. From ancient inscriptions to the streets of, well, everywhere, it seems.
And it's all part of its journey.
It really speaks to how resilient language is, doesn't it? It adapts, it travels, it finds new homes.
Absolutely. And speaking of journeys, we could probably delve a little deeper into the world of Telugu literature next.
Okay, let's do it.
And this journey, it's all captured in Telugu's literary tradition, centuries of stories, poems, plays. It's really remarkable.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. We've called Telugu a linguistic time capsule, but what kind of stories are we talking about here? What does Telugu literature look like?
Well, we're talking over 1,000 years of literary history, so it's not exactly a quick answer.
Right.
But the range is incredible. Ancient inscriptions, modern novels, poetry, plays, you name it, Telugu has it.
1,000 years. That's a lot to unpack. Where do we even start?
We've already touched on those early inscriptions, those fascinating glimpses into the language's roots.
Right, like that 200 BCE one.
Exactly. But as Telugu developed, so did its literature. One of the earliest major works is the Andhra Mahabharatam. It was written by a poet named Nannaya back in the 11th century.
Wait, the Maharatam? Like the epic poem from Sanskrit literature?
That's the one.
Right.
Imagine translating something that massive into Telugu back then. Nannaya is often called the Adikavi, the first poet in Telugu. He really set the stage for everything that came after.
Adi Kavi, that's quite the title. But it wasn't just him, right? Other writers must have followed in his footsteps.
Oh, absolutely. Tikana and Yurapragada, two other amazing poets they picked up where Nannaya left off, continuing the translation of the Mahabharatam. Those three together are basically Telugu literary royalty.
They sound legendary,
Yeah.
but I imagine they weren't just translating epics all day long. What other kinds of stuff were Telugu writers creating back then?
Oh, tons. I mean, alongside those big translations like the Ramayana was also translated into Telugu, you also start to see original Telugu works popping up. There's Sumati Satandam, this collection of poems about morality, life lessons, that kind of thing. And then there's Basava Purana, which tells the life story of this social reformer. Really interesting stuff.
So Telugu literature is engaging with these big social issues, even back then.
Definitely. And that social consciousness, it really takes center stage in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. It was a time of huge cultural change all over India, and Telugu writers, they were right there with it.
Using their words to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And one of the biggest names from that period, Kandukuri Veerasalingam. He's often called the father of modern Telugu literature.
Okay, father of modern Telugu literature. He must have been doing something right. What made him so influential?
Well, he was more than just a writer. He was a social reformer. He fought for women's rights, education, really challenged the caste system all through his writing. He had this way of tackling these really complex issues head on.
So his writing was more than just entertainment, it was a call to action.
Absolutely. His novel, Rajasekara Charitamo, it's a perfect example. Criticizes traditional practices, especially towards women, and pushes for progress, education. Really powerful stuff.
It's amazing how fiction can do that, you know? Make you think, make you question, maybe even inspire you to change things.
For sure. And Veerasalingam, he wasn't alone. You got Gurujata Apparao. He used satire, wit, all to point out social problems. And then Viswanatha Satyanarayana, he won the Jnanpith Award, India's highest literary honor. His works are full of philosophy, spirituality.
The Jnanpith Award, that's huge.
Right. Telugu writers, they were making their mark.
It's inspiring. Even today, it seems like Telugu literature is still pushing boundaries, engaging with the world.
That's what keeps it alive.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the written word. You know, Telugu storytelling, it goes way beyond books.
You're talking about Telugu cinema, right? Tollywood.
Dollywood.
Yeah.
That's a whole other universe of storytelling.
And we are here for it. It really is amazing how Telugu cinema can bridge that gap, you know, between tradition and the modern world. It's like it's keeping the language moving forward.
Exactly. It's like that with any language, really. It's always evolving. But it does make you think about the challenges a language like Telugu faces in a world that's, well, becoming more globalized all the time.
Right, because it's not like languages exist in isolation anymore.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest challenges is the dominance of languages like English, especially online. How do you keep a language like Telugu with its own unique identity from getting lost in all of that.
It's like finding that balance, right? Holding on to what makes it special, but also making sure it can keep up with the times.
That's it, exactly. And it's not just about preserving it. It's got to stay relevant, especially for younger generations. That means getting them interested, incorporating Telugu into new technologies, finding ways for people to actually use it.
You've mentioned technology a few times. What role do you see it playing in all of this? Is it helping Telugu,
Yeah.
hurting it, or maybe a bit of both?
I'd say a bit of both, honestly. I mean, the digital world can be tough for smaller languages. It's easy to get overshadowed.
Hmm.
But it also gives us these incredible tools, right? For teaching, for documenting, even for revitalizing languages. Things we couldn't have even imagined before.
So it's like tech gives us a chance to rethink how we approach all of this, language preservation, evolution, all of it.
Absolutely.
Are there any specific examples you can think of where technology is being used to help Telugu right now?
Tons. There are language learning apps designed just for Telugu, online dictionaries that are constantly being updated, and digital archives that are making these old Telugu texts accessible to anyone. Even social media, which, can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But think about it, it lets Telugu speakers connect with each other from all over the world.
It's like you said, giving the language that digital footprint, that online presence.
Yes.
Wow. It's incredible when you think about how far we've come, from those ancient inscriptions on the Amaravati Stupa to Telugu cinema to these amazing language learning apps. As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, is there anything, a final thought that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that language is more than just words, more than just grammar rules. It's a reflection of who we are, our history, our culture, everything. And Telugu, with its amazing literature, its vibrant film industry, it's a perfect example of that.
It's a language that deserves to be celebrated, that's for sure. And to everyone listening, if this deep dive sparked your interest, don't let it end here. Pick up a Telugu novel, check out a Tollywood film, maybe even learn a few phrases yourself. You never know what you might discover.
You might even get inspired to start a deep dive of your own.